I didn't become a victim of a false allegation when it happened to me. I became another recruit in the war against it.
My family and my name have been totally and permanently destroyed.
Is morphing into a witch hunt.
Always be presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty.
Hello, and welcome to Salem's Ghost, video number 2. I'm John Victor Ramses. In the first video, which was intended to be an overview of who I am and why I started this channel, I introduced some of the subject matter I will be elaborating on in future videos as this series continues, such as my take on the meaning and purpose of Operation U-Tree as a tongue-in-cheek inference to witch hunt at the start of the war against the patriarchy, as well as Western Australia's sinister sex offenders deniers treatment program designed exclusively for only males convicted in their court of only a sex offense, and not least of which, the facts behind the case of Dennis John McKenna, whom I knew well during my 6.5 years in Acacia Prison, and whom I helped with legal matters. But in these first few video segments, I would like to provide a deeper background into my own case and experience, and my fight for my daughter, which was the cause for the making of false allegations against me, as well as my fight for life and freedom in Australia, which will provide a necessary backdrop for the content I will be exploring as this video series continues. Indeed, what I have to say becomes not only content for this channel and information for you, the viewer, but is also my statement of facts regarding the barbaric handling of my case, as well as the strong anti-American, anti-rights attitude I experienced from West Australia's law enforcement, legal and judicial bodies, which stunned me to the core, and which now seems to have spread throughout Australia's political arena. Australia, in my view, was the first of the nations to fall under the globalist post-9/11 agenda. It would be relevant as I continue this series to read from my journals, especially from 2010, when I was initially arrested on false allegations, as well as what I had said in letters to the US Consulate, politicians, and in my submission to the Australian Productivity Commission's Access to Justice inquiry in 2013. It has direct bearing on what has and is presently occurring in my home country, the United States. In fact, what I had to say then was the reason I was completely silenced from any and all media access. I had, without knowing it then, every ability to expose the sex offense era and the agenda as not only a highly organized, well-funded industry designed to weaponize sexual allegations to be used against all males to topple the patriarchy, but also the ability to forewarn Americans of what would be coming to America in the form of the orchestrated Me Too movement. Indeed, had I been able to tell in 2011, even 2015, of what had occurred to me in Australia and what was occurring in Australia overall, the Me Too movement in the US, which would simultaneously be launched in numerous countries around the world, including the Commonwealth, Europe, and even India, likely would never have got off the ground, at least in the United States. Americans would have recalled what I had to say about the hostile, anti-man, anti-family campaigns being waged in Australia, and shut it down. I had been rearrested while on bail in 2011 due to pleading for U.S. media attention on my website, where I was exposing what was being done to me. And still later, I was betrayed by a reporter from the government-controlled West Australia newspaper in 2012, which I will be elaborating on in another video as my personal saga in Australia unfolds. As I mentioned in the introductory video, I was no ordinary prisoner. I was smart, determined, and wholly capable of seeing through the bullshit, even amidst my own shock and despair. My political plea for help from the roof of Acacia Prison's J Block caught them off guard. It scared the hell out of the Barnett government and the establishment. After that, I was effectively silenced, with even my own family in America being warned by my own US Consulate not to go to the media about the horrific treatment I had endured by Western Australia. At the time, I had no idea the danger I posed to their agenda. Had I not kept the consulate and ambassador close, as well as my family via phone and letters, and family of fellow prisoners, there is no doubt in my mind I would have become just another unexplained death in custody. This will go a long way in understanding later on why, as a listed low-risk prisoner, I had been escorted out of Australia all the way to LA, seated between two officers at the unreasonable cost of $11,000. That said, I would like to read to you a letter I wrote to then Australian Foreign Minister Julie Bishop, just shortly after the release of Australian journalist Peter Greste from an Egyptian prison in early 2015. This letter best describes what I had suffered through at the hands of a corrupt police and judiciary in Western Australia, a police state by any definition, and it will provide a backdrop for why I, as a U.S. citizen, created this channel, Salem's Ghost, after at last being deported on 31 December 2017, arriving in my hometown of Salt Lake City on New Year's Day 2018. Relevant links to references made in the letter will be provided below. To Julie Bishop, Australia Foreign Minister, Canberra, ACT, Australia. From John Victor Ramses, United States citizen, prisoner D 2174691, Western Australia. Dear Madam Foreign Minister, I'm writing you this letter in the wake of Peter Greste's triumphant return home from Egypt, where he had been incarcerated for 400 days in a foreign prison. In Mr. Greste's press conference for February 2015, seated between his relieved parents, he thanked an army of supporters, diplomats, strangers, colleagues, friends, and family who had tirelessly campaigned to free him back to his home soil. He thanked you, Madam Foreign Minister, also, as I recall. Mr. Greste spoke of his personal ordeals through those difficult 400 days, of never seeing the sunrise or stars, of reflecting on familiar beaches and family at home thousands of miles away, and he spoke of hope. Mr. Greste likened his odyssey to a near-death experience, conjuring flashbacks of his life and times, while also inviting him to find new respect for those simple things in life we take for granted but seldom notice day to day. I felt a deeply personal affinity with Mr. Greste's words as he spoke of his ordeal. His press conference stirred in me a myriad emotions. I felt elation for Mr. Greste and his family, that a good person had a rare win against tyranny, injustice, and oppression of fundamental rights. But also, it stirred in me a sadness, despair, and anger where my own situation is concerned, and for my family, my parents and children in America, who have worried sick and suffered emotionally for their loved one in a faraway foreign prison, as Mr. Greste's family had for him. But my family in America had suffered silently along with myself, without a voice or media to bring hope for remedy and justice through public awareness. In fact, it had been effectively suppressed, with even my own consulate once warning my family not to go to the media for fear that this state would only make things harder on me if they do. With sincere respect to Mr. Greste, I would dare say that the ordeal I have endured may be far worse, considering also that, unlike Egypt, The abhorrent injustices against me occurred in a country whose polity routinely touts pretension to civilization, democracy, liberty, human rights, as well as respect for the principles of international law and treaties it signed in good faith. The country I refer to, of course, is Australia, but to a more specific locale, Western Australia, where I have been unlawfully detained now for 1,483 days, as no more or less a hostage without a voice or remedy, and 10,000 miles from my home and family. Madam Foreign Minister, if you have taken the time from your hectic schedule to read this far, indulge me a little bit longer, as I provide a very brief background of myself before expanding for you on the appalling mistreatment and unnecessary personal loss and hardship that I, as a U.S. citizen, have been subjected to and so far barely survived under the guise of a civilized system of law in your home state of Western Australia. My name is John Victor Ramses. I immigrated to your country in September of 1999 to marry an Australian woman I had grown to love deeply through the previous years. Together, we had a beautiful daughter, and with her 2 existing children, we raised a family, worked, struggled, and shared life and dreams over the next 11 years. Ours was an unusual love story, as were the projects and endeavors we engaged. We were a close, loving, dedicated family. We were featured in magazines, the Sunday Times, ABC Stateline, and more. I was a writer, published author, IT tech, applications developer, producer, business owner, and entrepreneur. I owned an internet and marketing company and assisted certain WA businesses with the success they enjoy today. I was proud to have offered my talent and skill as an American immigrant in Australia. I was a positive representative of a typical American citizen. I never broke your laws. I don't drink alcohol and never partake in drugs, and I was an excellent father. In effect, I was as my parents had raised me to be. But sadly, even the best of love and relations can come to an end, apparently. On 27 April 2010, our enchanted love story ended, oddly, on the very day it had begun, in what seems now like eons ago. And in its place, an utter nightmare commenced for me, my family, my children in America, and for my Australian daughter. At the core of the separation was my daughter, or rather, my access rights to her, and a looming family court case I never had a fair opportunity to present. But fairness in Western Australia, as I would soon come to learn, is a nasty word that, like justice, is spoken tongue-in-cheek or in hushed tones at local pubs and back rooms, but rarely put into practice. Shortly following the separation, before I could lodge my case with family court, and just 5 days after my little girl's 10th birthday, my estranged wife, in collusion with her family, whom I had loved and adored during my time in Australia, invoked the so-termed nuclear option in divorces, and reported me to police with false allegations of sexual assault. On that accusation alone, I was arrested off the street, charged, and jailed. No investigation, no further ado, just goodbye. My name, career, social standing, and my life had been erased overnight, as certain as if I had been executed. In effect, I ceased to exist, simply on someone's word alone. That basic background established, it is not what a disgruntled ex-wife may have done simply because she could and get away with it in Australia. That is most certainly a matter to be dealt with at a later time. The more important matter here, where this letter is concerned, is what the Western Australia police, legal, and judicial did to me thereafter, which exposed to me a shocking mindset and ideology concerning rights and fair treatment that is as unacceptable in our modern civilized democracy as it is frightening that it exists at all. In your state of Western Australia, I was denied basic rights. My country's values and principles were routinely mocked by your police and others when I demanded or even mentioned rights. I was denied legal counsel or any legal advice, and ultimately forced to face a grueling, impossible 5-day trial in a foreign court and in bare feet, frightened, helpless, and degraded, without any legal knowledge whatsoever. Having no legal representation, I could not even access witnesses and vital evidence in my favor. I had to put my trust in the police and prosecutor to help me secure that evidence, which proved fabrication of the accusations and motive. But that trust was gravely misplaced. The evidence was kept from trial, and even knowing that it existed, the prosecutor used its absence against me to simply win another conviction for the state. Later, when I asked the arresting officer why he had withheld the vital evidence from me, he laughed and answered, "Because I'm assigned to the complainant, and helping you would be a conflict of interest." In trial, the law prevented me from cross-examining the complainant in person, so no facts in my defense were ever made known. Compounding the situation, the lack of legal counsel forced me to have to personally cross-examine my former wife, whom I still had deep feelings for, in spite of the divorce, the custody battle, and bitterness I harbored for making the allegations to keep me from family court and my daughter. I had absolutely no understanding of how to conduct or prepare for cross-examinations or trials in general. That, combined with strong, lingering sentiments for my wife and the absence of my daughter, and 2 weeks without sleep while trying to prepare alone for a trial, and fighting a return of angina stemming from a previous heart attack, I finally suffered a complete emotional breakdown and could not complete the vital cross-examination, leaving many issues in my defense unaddressed for the jury. The presiding judge, knowing I did not want to face trial without counsel, and in spite of laws insisting on a fair trial, simply watched with solemn indifference to fairness as I struggled to defend myself, and once reprimanding me before my wife and the all-Australian jury during the midst of my emotional breakdown, then allowed those barbaric, cruel conditions to conclude in a conviction. For 5 helpless days, the trial judge heard from me. "I don't know what to do. I'm not a lawyer. I can't defend myself, Your Honor. I have the evidence, but I don't know how to show it. Do you know how hard this is? I just don't know where to go now. I can't deal with this. I'm just learning through this, but catching on." For 5 days, the judge observed as I struggled to understand the complex rules and speak coherently while fighting emotions, fatigue, and suffering from mild angina. Said same judge then sentenced me to 6.5 years in this foreign prison where hope for remedy has not been forthcoming, but which conveniently puts my release date near my daughter's 18th year. The brief summary I have provided in this paragraph does not begin to describe the medieval conditions, confusions, and mental and emotional anguish that was the trial itself. The trial transcript does, however. But even the static nature of the transcript text cannot convey the utter loneliness I felt through it, nor the immeasurable stress and feeling of helplessness in trying to prepare alone for a complex trial I didn't understand. I had no help, no support, and no advice. There is no right to counsel in Australia, not even for vulnerable foreign nationals far from home. On the morning of the first day of trial, while driving myself to court with a haphazard stack of documents and evidence, I received a text message from my daughter in America, who, with the rest of my family, had been worrying for me. "Good luck today, Daddy. We are praying for you. We love you." With that text message, I broke down sobbing in the middle of rush hour traffic on the Mitchell Freeway and had to pull to one side. I had never felt so utterly alone in my life. I missed them all so much. And this shouldn't be happening at all, considering the police and prosecution knew of evidence 1 week in advance that discredited the accusations. I fought to compose myself. I next received a call from the court clerk asking me where I was, why I was late. I wanted to tell her that I was crying over a message from my daughter, how I missed my home and family, how exhausted I was from spending all night attempting to prepare my case alone. But she wouldn't have cared. Just another day at the job. Such is the nature of justice. Merging back into the slow-and-go traffic, still crying, I crept towards my own trial, as if in a procession for my own funeral. But allow me to back up to the long months leading up to this so-called trial. After arrest, despite being granted conditional bail by the magistrate, my every effort to get them to release me on bail was deliberately thwarted by persons in the system, including by the bail lawyer I had surprisingly been granted to handle my application for bail. In that matter, when I had at last managed to meet the conditions for release on bail, said lawyer blatantly lied to me via recorded phone conversation, telling me they're not going to let you out on bail anyway because there is a recording of you talking with your parents and planning to escape Australia. I was furious and demanded to hear that recording, as no such conversation ever took place. My demand was dismissed naturally, because there was never any such recording. This would be my introduction to deceit and corruption in the WA legal system. After that phone conversation, I contacted the US Consulate and explained the situation to them. Interestingly, I was released on bail the next day. While on bail, I tried desperately to acquire legal counsel for advice and representation for trial. Even being indigent at the time, I was denied legal aid for counsel, and professional lawyers wanted between $35,000 and $50,000 to take my case, which I did not have. I expressed my concerns and fear of being forced to stand trial alone without counsel to the US Consulate, who could only provide me with a weak, incomplete list of general lawyers in Western Australia, while informing me that the consulate cannot get involved in the legal matters of a host country, not even, apparently, to ensure that one of their own citizens is afforded basic rights and fair treatment in Australia, according to treaty, if nothing else. In other words, no American citizen can be assured of any right or fair treatment in the state of Western Australia, and the WA police enjoyed reminding me of that fact at every opportunity. On each occasion when I demanded my rights, or even alluded to having rights by treaty or otherwise, they would grin and tell me, "You watch too much American TV," or, "If you wanted rights, you should have stayed in America," or, "Australia has no guaranteed rights," and other disturbing comments to that effect. The arrogant disdain of rights and foreigners from the police, whom we were taught to trust in, reminded me of reading history of 1938 Germany, or perhaps more akin to modern North Korea, but not Australia. However, the cruel conditions in which I was made to stand trial, and the oppression of my voice or efforts to lodge an appeal, has demonstrated the accuracy of their words. Australia is the only democratic nation that does not have a constitutionally entrenched Bill of Rights for its people, and wholly disregards its obligations to international law and treaties. This in itself should be of grave concern to Americans or anyone planning to visit, particularly Western Australia, especially under the current mindset. What happened to me is a perfect example to justify those grave concerns. However, I'm not the only American nor foreign national to be subjected to such barbaric treatment. The prejudice against foreign nationals in Western Australia is well established. Some months following that trial and subsequent conviction, I at last succumbed to a near-fatal heart attack while in my cell due to immeasurable stress and heartache I had endured through the aforementioned atrocities and struggled to get an appeal. Following that, I then suffered an aneurysm due to an imbalance of the medication required since the heart attack, where once I was a fit, healthy, 50-year-old man before arrest, I'm now frail and gray beyond my years. Looking in the mirror in my cell, I am always compelled to ask, what did I do to you, Australia, to deserve this? Needless to say, my family's concerns for my welfare have been and are aptly justified. My Australian daughter would not recognize her own father, nor would my mother recognize her only son. In spite of reckless condemnation of Serco, however, and in particularly of certain officers, had it not been for the quick professional response and skill of the officers and medical staff during the 2012 heart attack, I would have died before reaching the hospital. This was confirmed to me by the surgeon, who later informed me that I only had about 10 minutes before the condition would have become irreversible. Some weeks later, when I returned to the prison from the hospital, I thanked these officers personally, both verbally and in writing, and provided a copy to the US Consulate for record. Just prior, but during that same frightening period, desperate to seek help through public awareness, I staged a lone and dangerous political plea for help atop of the roof of Acacia Prison on 28 March 2012, where I painted a broad blue message to then Prime Minister Julie Gillard concerning the violation of my rights, which had condemned a U.S. citizen to their prison. While that event was largely suppressed, the details of the event, the message I had written to the Prime Minister, the outcome, and my reasons for staging the political plea were provided in a statement to the U.S. Consulate, the ambassador, and to my family in America. I took to the roof with me a crude American flag I had secretly painted on a rough scrap of canvas late at night in the dim glow of my cell. Along the bottom white stripe of the flag, I had written a letter to my children in America and to my daughter in Australia concerning the value of my country's Constitution and Bill of Rights, and what happens to good people in countries that neither have nor recognize such a device. After some long months following that protest, the makeshift American flag I had hand-painted was finally released to the U.S. Consulate, who then mailed it to my daughter in America, where it remains in her possession as a symbol of her father's fight for freedom and justice in a foreign country. After surrendering to authorities, I was confined to solitary for 17 days. The U.S. Consulate arrived at the prison and, in an unprecedented act, was escorted to my cell in solitary confinement, where I delivered my statement to them in person concerning the severe abuse of my rights that led to wrongful incarceration. That event should have been big news, but no one outside ever knew it happened. Like the media, Madam Foreign Minister, I presume you didn't get that memo either. The consulate and ambassador did, along with my message that I will never just sit by and tolerate injustice. At the time, my family had planned to go to the media concerning my situation and what I was made to endure under the guise of justice in Australia, but the U.S. Consulate had warned them, "You don't know Western Australia. If you go to the media, they will just make it harder on your son." My family felt powerless and have been too afraid to expose this atrocity. It is an extremely sad and uncivil state of affairs in West Australia, where even the United States Consulate fears what this state will do to an American citizen seeking justice or standing up for themselves. However, I have now been here long enough to see this abuse in action against other prisoners, including another U.S. citizen who is equally being detained illegally. My family had twice visited Australia in happier times. However, I've since asked them to please not come here to visit me, for fear that they may be harassed by police, as a good friend of mine had been for helping me, which had occurred due to being betrayed by a reporter from the West Australia newspaper in 2012. Over these years imprisoned, I've created a series of 5 paintings depicting my cell, cell number 9, the same cell where I now write you this letter. The paintings capture my cell, my emotions, my thoughts, and perspective as a prisoner, as well as my resolve to have justice. They are heirlooms to my Australian daughter when she is older, but for now, they are hanging on the wall of my parents' home, the home I was raised in America. Through those paintings, my mother knows where her only son is kept, and what I see every day, what I feel. In a sense, the paintings help her and my father to feel like I'm not really so far away. Indeed, my heart and soul is imbued within those paintings. Madam Foreign Minister, what I have shared with you so far is but the tip of the iceberg. Every incident and every event of my odyssey has been documented with the US Consulate or the ambassador, or in my paintings, journals, letters home, and will be eventually recounted in my book, Not on My Life, a human story of an American father's fight for his daughter that becomes a fight for his life, freedom, and justice against a foreign legal system on the remote edge of civilization. That story continues to be written with each incident in each passing day. However, this is not just about me anymore, but what I've learned and now know. There are other innocent men in prison, young and old, somebody's son, father, or brother, whom I know personally and whose cases I have read in detail while helping them with their own fight for rights and justice, while attempting to also learn to help myself in lieu of a lawyer. As Mr. Greste and his family vowed to continue fighting to free the colleagues he left behind, neither can I turn my back on those whom I have come to know are innocent by fact, not while neither still incarcerated, nor especially upon my eventual return home to America. My story has become entwined with their story, these human beings, and our story is entwined with Mr. Greste and his colleagues, and with Mr. Chan and with Mr. Sukumaran, and those other human beings who are now set to be executed in a foreign country far from home. My family is entwined with their families, though they may never meet face to face or even know each other's names. In your recent appeal to the Indonesian government for clemency for Mr. Chan and Mr. Sukumaran, you invited members of that government and the public to put themselves in the shoes of the prisoners and their families. Indeed, they should, as Australia and America should also do with respect to their own imprisoned people. But I would add to this, from my personal experience in life, if we don't walk in another person's shoes in our heart, we are destined to walk in them through life. Some may call that karma. Under the current trends and mindset in Australia's polity, I would call it destiny. But where do we, the people of our great free and democratic societies, flee to evade persecution, injustice, and indefinite imprisonment with no remedy? Indeed, where? I note that prior to Mr. Greste's release, you had taken the time to contact the family of Mr. Greste in order to assure them that Australia is doing everything it can to help their loved one far from home. Could I please perhaps trouble you also to contact my parents and my children in America with the same assurance? It would ease my mother's heartache somewhat, I'm sure. Madam Foreign Minister, I have just a few closing words. From the first morning I woke to the song of magpies and laughter of kookaburras, the fragrance of wattle and sea breeze, the welcoming embrace of my new Aussie family. I loved this Australia. That was the warm morning of 3 September 1999. And from the moment my Aussie daughter was born into this life from the sacred womb of her Aussie mother the following year, even though I am a foreigner, I had a responsibility to and a vested interest in the well-being of my daughter's country, for her, for my generations from her, for the Australian community within which they will interact and grow through the years and eras ahead, long after I'm gone from life. Thus, towards that resolve, from the darkest cell, or from 10,000 miles away in my home country, I will use my every talent, skill, wisdom, and experience to peacefully but sternly defend my daughter's country from the encroaching tyranny, injustice, and oppression that has taken her father and hundreds of men, women, and sometimes children under the guise of a civilized system of law. And after this experience, neither my voice nor my rights will ever be oppressed again. Today is my birthday. I am 55 years old, 1,483 days unlawfully imprisoned. If you know my daughter, tell her I love her, and that I never left her as I promised. I was taken. Madam Foreign Minister, thank you for your time. John Victor Ramses, 15 February, 2015. I hope that letter, which was received by Julie Bishop, but ignored, gives you some reasonable background into what occurred to me in Australia, as well as my deep love for Australia, my daughter's country. This is just the beginning. I am John Victor Ramses. I didn't become a victim of a false allegation when it happened to me. I became another recruit in the war against it. Share, comment, like, or dislike, but by all means subscribe, especially if you are an American, Australian, or a citizen of the Commonwealth country. And lastly, but certainly not least, I am searching for my daughter Amy, who is somewhere in Australia. I last saw her 4 days after her 10th birthday. She is now 18. If you know my daughter, tell her I love her and that I never left her. Her daddy is taken. Thanks for watching Salem's Ghost.